It just doesn't make
Laufey
sense.
can't be a real person.
People just aren't that perfect.
Maybe she's an alien.
Iceland isn't even
She
a real
must be a
place.
cyborg.
Maybe I'm
I haven't
imagining
taken
her
her
and
meds
sings
and
that
she
well.
plays the guitar.
Maybe
Yeah,
she's
I haven't
a
seen her
ghost.
reflection on camera. She must be a vampire.
Enough. Hello, Internet. Welcome back to Jams by Jesh. I'm Jesh, and today I'm here to talk to you about one of my favorite singers, Laufey. We're going to delve into her vocal technique, into her songwriting, into her lyrics, into her production. This is an all about Laufey video. So, buckle up, get bewitched, and if you enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what your favorite song off of Bewitched was. Alright, without further ado, let's get into it. So, who is Laufey? I would describe Laufey's music as you're sitting at a hotel bar and the singer in the lounge is performing this style of music. It's like you're walking down a boardwalk and the sun is setting. It's like you're going for a long drive, but you're slightly sad that your trip is over. That is what Laufey's music sounds like. Am I in love with Laufey? Maybe, but that's besides the point. Starting off, let's talk about Laufey's vocal technique. And to start, we need to discuss her vocal tone. Laufey's voice is warm and it's pure. There's not a lot of auto-tune on it. There's not a lot of effects on it. It's this very raw, unprocessed, naturally warm tone. And something about that just goes very well with the genre of music that she performs, with the style of music that she writes, with her personality. It is just this like sweetness that complements everything very well. Next, we should discuss her vocal range. Laufey's register is a little lower, it's a little deeper, and because of that, it gets this sound that isn't very common out of a lot of pop singers, but it's very evocative of classic jazz. Laufey said before that Etta James was one of her biggest influences, and that really is noticeable in her vocals. You can see that she has the ability to go low and high. Next, we should discuss her vocal technique. Laufey is a very well-trained vocalist. It often helps coming from other musicians in your family because you're just trained to understand music from a young age. And Laufey has said before that music has been a part of her life for a very long time. And this is visible in her technique. She's controlled, she's methodical, and she can sustain her vocals very well, effortlessly. There's vibrato, there's all these like runs that she does that are crazy. She scats, but we'll get into that later. There's so much about it that is just so good. A further example of this is her enunciation. This is a technique that a lot of singers do because, typically it sounds more sing-songy and it just sounds better. Laufey is actively making the lyrics a little distorted in favor of a more favorable listening experience, which we definitely get out of this. Now let's discuss Laufey's songwriting techniques that she employs. To start, let's discuss the complex harmonies that she employs in her music. Often her vocals will sound a little dissonant when compared to the backing instrumental track, but it's deliberate. It's very evocative of the jazz that Laufey was so inspired by. Here are a couple of examples where the harmony of the song is very complex and not reminiscent of most pop that you'll listen to. I would argue that this is because of a lot of non-major tonalities that Laufey employs. Typical pop music is in the major key. It doesn't really venture outside that scale. These are the 8 notes of the major key. You could even go a little further and say that most of them stick to the pentatonic scale. But Laufey, being inspired by jazz, ventures outside of that quite a lot. Another thing that Laufey does to great effectiveness is her unconventional arpeggios. Arpeggios, for context, are this. They're a common songwriting technique, right? But these arpeggios that Laufey employs throughout the album are quite different than most arpeggios that you might be used to if you only really recognize them from pop music. This is because of the non-major tonalities that Laufey employs. What results are some really sexy arpeggios, if you ask me. It's pretty interesting and it's really exciting. It keeps you into the music and curious, almost like there's layers of the music unwrapping as you're listening to the album. Another thing that Laufey borrows from jazz music is scatting. There are multiple examples where Laufey can be seen scatting throughout the album. If you ask me, this is an excellent reference to classic jazz music that Laufey was inspired by, but also B, a way of just adding interesting harmonies and melody twists and turns that otherwise are filling empty space. It's a way of keeping the listeners interested and also surprising them a little bit. With that said, it's not to say that Laufey is completely going off the script and just alienating her listeners. In fact, there are steps that she takes to do the opposite. One thing that Laufey employs is the use of a rather conventional song structure. Most songs follow the structure of verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, or something along those lines, which is pretty evocative of pop music. In this way, she doesn't completely confuse listeners who aren't familiar with the more experimental jazz sounds. Another thing that Laufey does is employ motifs throughout her writing and use these repeatedly in order to almost foreshadow parts of the album. This is especially relevant in the song Nocturne, one of my favorite off the album, which is a complete piano composition that foreshadows a couple of songs throughout the album. Take a listen over here.
Wrap me in your arms, leaned in and whispered.
Pretty cool, right? I talk about motifs and repetition a lot, so I won't go too much further into details about that, but I will quote Adam Neely, one of my favorite YouTubers, when I say repetition legitimizes. The way of getting listeners of your music comfortable to an idea that you want them to get comfortable with is by repeating it ad nauseum. Laufey employs the use of some very inventive melodies. Melodies that stray from the typical 1, 4, 5, 6 that we're used to, in pop in particular. Pop is a genre that can get very samey. Axis of Awesome has famously done their 4-chord song multiple times. And the idea, if you're not familiar, is that a lot of the pop songs that we listen to are built off of the same 4-chord structure. But Laufey completely abandons that ideal and goes pretty far out there for some of her melodies. Laufey's tempo play also is worthy of attention, if you ask me. A lot of the music on this album is a little slower than you might be than you might be used to. But that's not bad, that's very jazz. And at the same time, there's a couple of really fast tracks in there. Compare From the Start to Bewitched. One is much faster than the other. But this like up and down sort of tempo really does the album a favor, in my opinion, because it goes through a journey with you. It has its climactic moments and then it pulls you back in. It's like waves on the ocean where it just pushes and then it pulls again. Lastly, I would like to mention the melodic resolution that Laufey employs throughout the album, because she mixes it up. There are a couple of cases where Laufey uses some strong melodic resolution, whether that's the plagal cadence or the perfect cadence. But then there are a couple of other examples where Laufey does other types of resolutions and walkdowns that might be a little less satisfying. Now let's talk about Laufey's lyrics. Laufey uses some inventive rhyming techniques. Now, rhyming isn't a strictly necessary pillar of songwriting, but we like things that sound nice. And as I said before, repetition legitimizes, and rhyming is just another extension of that. It's another motif, if you will. Laufey also does a good job of using these beautiful sensory lyrics. Lyrics that you could feel and smell and taste, and see and hear. These are things that just serve to immerse you further into the song. I would also mention that Laufey incorporates a lot of relatable topics into her songs. Laufey incorporates Gen Z vernacular very well into her music. The famous example is in From the Start when she says blah blah blah. She even has made merch about this, which I would very much like to buy for myself. Laufey doing this is a great way of expanding her audience and opening up this sort of old-fashioned genre in jazz to newer people. Laufey even incorporates a couple of references to some jazz icons in her lyrics. Here is one example that I really like. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. It's pretty cool. Laufey also has fun with her lyrics. Here's a tidbit from her Genius interview that I really liked, and I feel like does a good showcase of maybe why Laufey's songwriting is so welcoming and so open.
I think this is the funniest verse. The burning pain, I kind of almost see it as this kind of like very like, oh, burning pain, like almost like this period drama type of, of being upset over someone. And yeah, she's so perfect, like blah, blah, blah. Which I really enjoy putting lyrics like that into these like kind of jazzy songs because it's like, it sounds like old music, but then like the blah, blah, blah lyric is very, very modern, I would say.
By being self-aware about the lyrics and by having fun with this, it sort of serves to make the genre less pretentious and less gatekeepy to listeners like me or like you who might not have had as much jazz experience before. And lastly, regarding the lyricism, Laufey's songs employ some great storytelling that take you on an emotional roller coaster. Her songs aren't just a singular mood throughout. There's an arc to them. Here's a tidbit from her Genius interview about From the Start that I found very interesting.
In jazz music, there's often a tag where like, you'll lengthen the outro, lengthen the ending. The lyrics will sometimes change, and I've always wanted to do that with my own music. So instead of confess I loved you from the start, it's just this very clear, I know I've loved you from the start. The music underneath kind of breaks away from this like upbeat bossa nova thing and just goes straight into like a classical cello ending, which I played. I had like a very specific classical reference that I wanted for it.
You see, by having this resolution to the song beyond just melodically, it feels closed, it feels comfortable. We go on this journey with Laufey and we're taken to the end of it and we feel catharsis. The last thing that I'd like to touch on that Laufey does excellent is the production of this album. Laufey employs some pretty varied instrumentation. Sometimes it's lo-fi, but then other times we almost have a full orchestra or a full choir. This varied instrumentation is so interesting to me because it's Laufey saying, I can be anything. I'm not limited by the instruments that I play along with. She just goes so well with all of it too, that it makes me excited to see her venture even further out of those boxes. The last thing that I would like to touch on is the sort of modern pop production that Laufey has in this album. Laufey's album sounds pretty tonically accurate. It sounds like it was made today. And this serves to bridge that gap of old listeners who don't like pop, but then new listeners who haven't really heard jazz before and don't want to try it. I think that this is an excellent example of Laufey blending the two styles. Alright everyone, that's it for this video. I hope you all had a good time, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what your favorite song off of Bewitched was. That's it for today. See you again next time. Bye-bye!